Welcome to U.S. Law Update. Today, we're examining key Supreme Court decisions and their impact on our constitutional rights. A routine traffic stop on an Arizona highway should have lasted just a few minutes. Instead, it turned into a debate about constitutional rights. One officer, one driver, one simple request for identification. What happened next raised questions that went far beyond a traffic violation. The stop began with a lane violation. Minutes later, both sides were arguing about where police authority ends and constitutional protections begin. A routine traffic stop on an Arizona highway should have lasted just a few minutes. Instead, it turned into a debate about constitutional rights. When a driver asked a single constitutional question during a routine traffic stop, an ordinary encounter.
A few questions are asked, documents are exchanged, and within a matter of moments, both people go on with their day. But every once in a while, a routine stop turns into something far more complicated. Not because of shouting, not because of a chase, and not because anyone is accused of a serious crime. Sometimes it happens because two people standing on opposite sides of a car door have very different ideas about where government authority ends and individual rights begin. On an unusually warm evening in late September, traffic moved steadily along a stretch of highway just outside Phoenix, Arizona. The sun had already dropped below the horizon, leaving behind a fading orange glow that reflected off hundreds of windshields. Commuters were making their way home. Delivery trucks occupied the right lane. The road was busy, but calm. At approximately 7:18 p.m., Officer Daniel Mercer of the Arizona Department of Public Safety was monitoring traffic from a marked patrol vehicle positioned near an entrance ramp. According to his later report, he noticed a silver sedan drift briefly across a lane marker before correcting itself. The movement lasted only a moment, but in his view, it was enough to justify a traffic stop. Officer Mercer pulled onto the highway and activated his emergency lights. A few seconds later, the silver sedan signaled and moved safely onto the shoulder. Inside the vehicle was 38-year-old Michael Reed, a software technician returning home after visiting a client across town. He had no criminal record, no outstanding warrants, and no indication that his evening was about to become the subject of intense.
To many viewers, that might sound like an unnecessary complication. After all, most drivers simply hand over their license without discussion. But from a legal perspective, the question was not meaningless. Different states have different rules regarding identification requirements during police encounters. In the context of a lawful traffic stop, drivers are generally required to provide a valid driver's license and vehicle documentation. Refusing can create additional legal consequences. The important detail, however, was that Reed wasn't immediately refusing, at least not yet. He appeared to be trying to understand the legal basis for the request. Officer Mercer responded that Arizona law required a licensed driver operating a vehicle to present identification during a lawful traffic stop. For a moment, it seemed the issue might end there. Instead, Reed asked the officer what specific facts had led him to believe a traffic violation had occurred. Officer Mercer informed Reed that he had been stopped because he appeared to cross a lane marker. Reed listened carefully. Then he asked a question. It wasn't an aggressive question. It wasn't even a particularly unusual one. Was I being detained for a traffic violation, or was I suspected of committing a crime? For a brief moment, the conversation paused. The question mattered because traffic stops occupy an unusual space in American law. They are not entirely voluntary encounters, but they are not automatically criminal investigations either. An officer can temporarily detain a driver based on a suspected traffic violation.
That authority comes from long-standing legal principles, allowing officers to investigate possible violations of the law. But what happened next would begin moving the encounter away from a simple traffic stop.
Mercer repeated that he observed the vehicle cross a lane marker and again requested identification. This time, Reed hesitated. Several seconds passed. Then he said something that would shape the rest of the encounter. "I don't want to waive any constitutional rights." The statement changed the atmosphere instantly. Not because it was threatening, not because it was unlawful, but because constitutional language tends to signal that a routine interaction may be heading in a different direction. Body cameras recorded officers. Dashboard cameras recorded traffic stops. Many citizens recorded interactions with government officials. Yet roadside encounters are often shaped as much by perception as by legal doctrine. The officer now understood that every word exchanged during the stop might later be reviewed by supervisors, attorneys, judges, journalists, or thousands of strangers online. Mercer remained composed. "Sir, I still need your driver's license." Reed looked toward the steering wheel. "I understand that's what you're requesting." The wording immediately stood out. He hadn't complied, but he hadn't clearly refused either. The distinction mattered. Officers conducting traffic stops often need clear answers. Ambiguous responses can complicate decisions.
Was the driver refusing? Was he delaying? Was he attempting to negotiate? Or was he genuinely trying to understand the limits of government authority before acting? Mercer tried again. "Are you refusing to provide identification?" Several seconds passed. The evening traffic continued rushing past only a few feet away. Then Reed answered, "I'm trying to determine whether your detention is lawful." The response did little to resolve the situation. The officer explained once more that he had observed a lane violation and that Arizona law required drivers to present identification during a lawful stop. Reed listened carefully.
Then he asked another question. "If your observation turns out to be mistaken, does that invalidate everything that follows?" It was the type of question more commonly discussed inside law school classrooms than beside a highway shoulder. Mercer declined to engage in a constitutional debate. Instead, he repeated his request for identification. For nearly a minute, neither man moved significantly. The conversation seemed trapped in a loop. One side wanted compliance. The other wanted justification. Eventually, Mercer stepped back from the vehicle.
Officers frequently call for assistance when encounters become prolonged or legally complicated. Within minutes, flashing lights appeared in the distance. A second patrol vehicle arrived. Officer Sarah Collins approached and received a brief summary of the situation. She listened carefully before walking toward the driver's window. Unlike Mercer, she began with a different approach. "Mr. Reed, can you help me understand your concern?" For the first time, the conversation shifted. Reed explained that he believed citizens often surrendered rights simply because they felt pressured during encounters with authority. He said he wanted to ensure that any compliance on his part was based on law rather than assumption. Collins listened.
Additional patrol traffic moved through the area, and inside the sedan, the central question remained unanswered. Would Reed provide identification, or would the encounter move toward enforcement? Eventually, Collins returned to speak with Mercer. The officer stepped several yards away from the vehicle. Their conversation was partially captured by body camera audio. They discussed options: issue a citation, continue requesting compliance, order the driver out of the vehicle. Each choice carried consequences. Each introduced new legal considerations, and each increased the likelihood that the stop would become something far more significant than a routine traffic matter.
The sergeant introduced himself calmly. His tone was measured. There was no sign of frustration or urgency. By that point, nearly 40 minutes had passed since Officer Mercer first activated his emergency lights. The original traffic violation had almost become secondary. The real issue now centered on compliance, detention, and constitutional boundaries. "Mr. Reed," the sergeant began, "help me understand what outcome you're hoping for here." The question caught Reed slightly off guard. For the first time, someone wasn't simply demanding action. Someone was asking about intent. Reed explained that he wasn't trying to create conflict. He wasn't attempting to flee. He wasn't hiding his identity. His concern, he said, was broader. He believed citizens often complied with government authority without understanding whether that authority was being exercised lawfully. The sergeant nodded. Then he offered an observation. There's a difference between questioning authority and refusing lawful instructions. That distinction would later become central to discussions about the incident. Rights exist, authority exists, and legal systems constantly attempt to balance the two. The challenge is that those boundaries are not always obvious in real time. What appears lawful to one person may appear questionable to another. What seems like reasonable caution to an officer may feel like unnecessary intrusion to a citizen. The sergeant then asked a direct question. Do you possess a valid driver's license? Yes. Is the vehicle legally registered? Yes. Do you have proof of insurance? Yes. The answers came quickly. No hesitation, no ambiguity. The officers now faced an unusual reality. The driver claimed to possess every document required by law, yet he continued refusing to present them. The sergeant considered the situation carefully.
Then he made a decision. He informed Reed that failure to provide identification during a lawful traffic stop could result in additional enforcement action. The warning was clear. The consequences were real. And for the first time, Reed appeared genuinely uncertain. Throughout the encounter, he had projected confidence, not arrogance, not hostility, confidence. Now that confidence seemed less certain, perhaps because the discussion was no longer theoretical. The possibility of arrest had entered the conversation. The silence that followed lasted several seconds. Traffic continued flowing. Emergency lights flashed against the darkening highway. Then Reed asked a question. "If I comply now, does that mean I've surrendered my right to challenge the stop later?" The sergeant answered immediately, "No." The response was simple, but it changed everything. He explained that complying with lawful requests during an encounter generally does not eliminate a person's ability to challenge government actions through legal channels afterward. Courts exist precisely because disputes over legality are often resolved after events occur. The roadside is rarely the final stage of the process. For the first time all evening, Reed seemed to receive the clarification he had been seeking. He looked down, then toward the center console, then back at the officers. A decision was being made. Slowly, he opened a compartment beside the driver's seat. Officer Mercer watched carefully. Officer Collins remained alert. The sergeant stood quietly. Reed removed a wallet. From inside the wallet, he produced a driver's license. Next came registration documents. Then proof of insurance. One by one, he handed them through the window. 43 minutes after the stop began, the officers finally received the documents they had requested near the very beginning. The atmosphere changed immediately. The tension that had built over nearly an hour seemed to ease. Mercer returned to his patrol vehicle. A records check was conducted. The results were exactly what Reed had claimed: valid license, valid registration, valid insurance, no warrants, no criminal concerns, nothing suggesting danger, nothing suggesting criminal activity. The investigation produced no surprises. Several minutes later, Mercer returned. What happened next surprised almost everyone who later reviewed the footage.
The officer issued only a warning. No citation, no fine, no additional charge. Just a warning regarding the alleged lane violation. The encounter appeared finished. But the story was far from over, because the legal debate began after the traffic stop ended. Within days, portions of the encounter appeared online. Viewers immediately divided into competing camps. Some believed Reed had unnecessarily complicated a simple situation. Others argued he had raised legitimate questions about government authority and individual rights. Legal commentators weighed in. Former officers offered opinions. Civil liberties advocates offered different interpretations. The central disagreement remained remarkably consistent. Was Reed responsibly exercising constitutional awareness? Or
The answer depended largely on which aspect of the encounter people focused on. Those emphasizing individual rights pointed to the importance of questioning authority and understanding legal obligations. Those emphasizing law enforcement concerns pointed to the practical realities officers face when conducting roadside investigations. Both perspectives highlighted genuine legal principles, and that was precisely why the incident attracted attention. It wasn't a story about obvious wrongdoing. It wasn't a story about corruption. It wasn't a story about violence. It was a story about uncertainty. The kind of uncertainty that exists whenever constitutional theory collides with real-world enforcement. Months later, legal experts would continue discussing the encounter, not because it created groundbreaking law, but because it illustrated something deeper. Rights are easiest to support in theory. Authority is easiest to support in theory.
The difficult part comes when both appear at the same car window at the same time. And perhaps that is why the footage continued generating debate long after the warning was issued. Because millions of Americans saw themselves somewhere in that conversation. Some identified with the officer trying to do his job. Others identified with the citizen demanding clarity. Neither side viewed themselves as the villain. Both believed they were acting reasonably. And that may be the most fascinating part of all. Sometimes the most important constitutional disputes are not the ones that happen in courtrooms. Sometimes they happen quietly, beside a highway, under flashing lights, with two people trying to answer the same question from opposite directions.
That new coffee shop down the street actually has surprisingly good pastries, and the atmosphere is perfect for just relaxing or getting some work done.